Jesus said, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. Who told somebody about Jesus this week? All right. Your co-workers? Okay, somebody else? All right. Got a couple? Way to go. Grandchildren? Yes. Family members? Okay. Way to go. I hope you'll try next week to tell somebody about Jesus. Who's on time reading your Bible through this year? Yay. Okay. Way to go. And if you're following our schedule, by the way, if you're not getting the email that I send out each week, get me your email address and I'll get you added to the list. But in this week's reading, we came across the answers to these three trivia questions. The king of Assyria invaded the northern kingdom of Israel and Samaria and took all of the inhabitants to foreign soil. Why did this disaster befall them? They worshipped idols. They forsook God, the God that had put them there in that country. Okay, then when the Assyrians came and besieged Jerusalem, it was a different story. God sent an angel and killed most of the invading army. How many Assyrian soldiers did the angel kill in one night? 185,000 of them. All right, good. In the New Testament. All right, now here's we're going to test your memory because we covered this 2 weeks ago, and I reminded you last week. In 3 days, and to 3 different audiences, John the Baptist gave a 3-point message. What were his 3 points? The first point, he's here. Second point, look at him. Behold the Lamb. The third message, follow him. Right, okay. Good. All right, today we're going to be studying the text, John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And in that text, it's very familiar territory. The wedding feast at Cana. To give you a little background, Cana was a very, very small village. It was probably just a few dozen inhabitants. It was 9 miles northeast of Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. Nazareth at the time, the best estimates were about 500 people in the town of Nazareth. So Cana is, again, about 9 miles away. So these were probably people that were known to the folks in Nazareth, maybe relatives, a lot of them, and that they would have known the people in Nazareth. So our story begins, or let me back up. The book of John has 2 stated purposes. The first is it's a book of apologetics. It's all about determining the theology about Jesus. And then the last stated purpose we find in John chapter 20, verse 20 or 31, where it says that these things were written so that you might know Jesus is the Son of God and that through your faith you might be saved. So it's an evangelistic book. And we already know that in the first chapter that we covered, the first 18 verses are the testimony of John. Then we get the testimony of John the Baptist, and then it wraps up with the testimony of the 5 disciples. Those were Andrew, Peter, John, Nathaniel. There's one more. Philip. Very good. Those 5 were the first disciples. Now they were believers in God. They were followers of God, but they were under the old covenant at that point. because they had not believed in Jesus as the Messiah. And we'll see that come about as a result of this first miracle that Jesus does. How many of you ever been to a wedding? All of us. Okay? Some of us to our own weddings. And I went to a wedding yesterday. And it was a beautiful, beautiful ceremony. And Jesus blessed marriage with his presence at this wedding. So let's read the text. John chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And I'm reading from the New King James Version. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast." And they took it. When the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, and did not know where it came from, but the servants who drew it knew where it came. But the servants who drew the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, "Every man at the beginning sets out the good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples did what? Believed in him. Yeah. So we have the testimony of John, the testimony of John the Baptist, the testimony of the disciples in the first chapter. Now, in chapter 2, we begin to see the evidences through signs of Jesus as the Son of God. In this book, John gives us 8 signs, 8 miracles that he did pointing to his deity. He turns water into wine here in chapter 2. He heals a dying man in chapter 4. He cures a paralyzed man in chapter 5 and creates food for thousands of people in chapter 6. He walks on water at the end of chapter 6, and he gives sight to the blind in chapter 9. He raises a dead man who'd been dead 4 days in chapter 11. Oh, what was his name? Lazarus. Very good. And then in chapter 21, this one could be a miracle. He creates a meal for the disciples there on the banks of the Sea of Galilee. So this miracle that John records has so much to learn, or that we have so much to learn from this. But just because John only writes about those 8 miracles does not mean that's all Jesus did. As a matter of fact, John tells us, and John spent 3 years with him. John observed. And John said in chapter 20, verse 30, "Therefore many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book." So don't think that these are the only ones that he did. As a matter of fact, John says there were also many other things which Jesus did which are not written in detail. I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books that would be written to chronicle all the signs that Jesus did. Imagine that. The world couldn't contain the books if all of the signs that Jesus did were written. Wow. So here we are at the beginning of Jesus' public ministry, and one of the things that's exciting about studying the Bible is studying the firsts. That's why I love the book of Genesis. It's full of firsts. And here we're looking at the first of Jesus' signs and miracles, the beginning of his public ministry. Now remember, here he is in Cana of Galilee. He grew up in Nazareth. And he grew up under a cloud of stigma. Why is that?
Nothing good came out of it.
Nothing good can come, Nathaniel, nothing good can come out of Nazareth. But what about the circumstances surrounding his birth? But she's betrothed to Joseph, and then she turns up pregnant before the wedding. And that cloud, by the way, you know some of those circumstances.
Amen.
And you remember some people who may have been born out of wedlock, and those memories don't go away. You know, you remember those things. And I'm sure this is something that Mary struggled with her entire life, or at least up to this point. So at the beginning of his public ministry, he's beginning it near his hometown. 9 miles away is Nazareth, and they're in Cana, a very small village with a few dozen inhabitants. But it is a phenomenal experience that's going on here. This is the wedding. This is the culmination of a year's worth of planning and preparation. The betrothal happened about a year prior to this, and you know what happened during that year? The groom, by the way, the betrothal was a legal binding agreement that could only be broken by divorce. Even though they had not come together to consummate the marriage, it was still a contractual agreement, and it was still a covenantal agreement. And during that year, the groomsman the groom would spend that year preparing. And in that year, he would demonstrate to the bride's family that he was capable of taking care of their girl. He would build a house, or he would add on to his father's house to make accommodations for the family, the new family. And then he would also prepare economically so that they would know he'd be industrious during this year to make sure they understood that he could support her. And this party, by the way, contrary to our custom, the groom was the one that was responsible for the expenses relative to the party and the wedding. And this party typically lasted a week. It could be shorter, but many of them lasted for a full week, and the guests were entertained, the guests were fed, the guests were provided wine and housing, and it was quite a to-do. I was in 1976, I was in Tiberias and got to get a glimpse of a Jewish wedding. There was one taking place right outside the hotel where we were staying, and those folks knew how to party. I'm telling you, they did. But Jewish weddings this was a big party. So we're going to talk about actually 5 things, but first is the party itself. The wedding. This, again, remember, this is a statement by the groom that he is capable of providing for the bride. And something goes wrong. This was the wedding at Cana. So who all was there? Well, it was the family of the groom, the family of the bride, and then their invited guests. The guests were friends of the family. And it says the mother of Jesus was there. It doesn't say she was invited. It says she was there. And it's very likely she was there serving, helping. And then Jesus, both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. So it's Jesus and his disciples. So how many is that? 5 disciples, yeah. And so it's Jesus and the 5 disciples are invited to the wedding. By the way, this is Nathaniel's hometown, so he probably knows the family real well. Only a few dozen people in the village. And the others are from near, so they probably all were known entities. And so they came together there for the wedding, and it's the party is taking place. It's a big deal. Weddings are big deals, especially when they happen in our families. And we want them always to come off without a hitch. It would be wonderful if they all did. But in this small town, this party is going to be one of the social highlights of the year. Because think about, I grew up in a small community. And weddings, funerals were major social events in our community. And they all revolved around the church or the school. But everybody knew everybody else, and there's a wedding taking place here. Marriage, of course, is designed by God. First marriage, God was the one that presided over the first marriage of Adam and Eve. And he is endorsing marriage, Jesus is, by his presence here, and endorsing it as a common grace. Common grace, sunrises, everybody experiences that. Weddings, the people of God and the heathen all enjoy weddings. Sleep, good health, a good meal, falling in love, all of these are common graces. And the epitome at the top of the heap of common graces is marriage. It's a gift that God has given to us. And we honor marriage. Most of us honor marriage, but any society that begins to move away from honoring marriage between a man and a woman do so at their peril, because God honors marriage. The fabric of society is built on the results of marriage, the family unit. So God has ordained it, and Jesus went to the wedding. And there, it says they ran out of wine. Think about this. This is the groom is responsible for all of this. And he's trying to show the family of his bride that he's capable of managing things well. And they run out of wine. Oh, this is a setup for a major embarrassment. A major embarrassment. And Mary comes to Jesus. She doesn't ask him to do anything about it. She just says to him, they have no wine. Now, it could be that she is trying to prod him to do a miracle. and to establish himself as the Messiah by that sign. Now remember, she has labored and lived under this stigma of becoming pregnant during the betrothal. Jesus, considered by many as an illegitimate child, now coming into his public ministry, she could be free of all of that if he establishes himself as the Son of God. Or it could be, and this one I think fits better. Think about this. There never was a human being any more wise than Jesus.
Amen.
Okay? And that didn't just happen when he turned 30. He's been living in her house his whole life. At 12 years old, he's saying, I've got to be about my Father's business, and he's teaching the rabbis. Okay? What if every time there was a difficulty in the home, Mary goes to Jesus and says, we got this problem. And then he responds with incredible wisdom and comes up with a solution for the problem. I think that's more likely. That she is accustomed to going to him every time there's a problem, and he has these wonderful ideas, these solutions for the problems, not miracles, godly wisdom. So she comes to him and she says, there is no wine. Now, by saying that to him, she knows that he knows. She knows that he knows what the implications of that difficulty are. So we're at the party, now we've got a problem. Problem is, they have no wine, and the potential for severe embarrassment is very, very real. So, at the party, we got a problem. And she brings the problem to Jesus. And there, I won't chase this rabbit, but there's a whole theology of getting Mary to ask Jesus for whatever it is you want. And it's all based on this particular passage of Scripture. So that we'll move on from that. I don't want to get distracted with that. But Mary doesn't ask him to do anything. You see what she says? She doesn't say, they have no wine, can you fix it? She says, they have no wine. Now, as I was studying that this week, I began to think, maybe my prayers ought to be changed a little bit. Rather than telling God how I want him to fix it, what if I just share the need?
Amen. Amen.
I wouldn't be dogmatic about that, but it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
When you let God, you tell him what you want.
Yeah. So Mary is just telling Jesus there's a problem. And she knows that he knows how serious the problem is, what the implications are, and she knows that he already knows how to fix it. She doesn't know how he's going to fix it, but she knows he can. And she expects that he will. So she says to him, they have no wine. And Jesus said to her, woman, what does your concern have to do with me? Now that's a mild rebuke in a way, but it might not be at all. Woman is a term of respect in the South. We would say ma'am. My hour, and then he goes on to say, my hour has not yet come. we could spend an hour on that, because he does say that my hour has not come. Later on he says it again, my hour has not come. Then he says it again, my hour has not come, until he gets to the Garden of Gethsemane. He's talking with the Father and he says, my hour has come. My hour has come. So, this problem, this predicament is real, and in this small town, this small village, it is very, very serious. So after Jesus says to her, my hour has not come, she just turns to the servants and says, whatever he says to you, do it. And I got to thinking about that one. What good advice that Mary has given us down through the ages. Whatever he says, do it. It's not complicated. It's not brain surgery. Whatever he says, just do it. Whatever he says, do it. And again, she doesn't know how he's going to do it, but she has confidence that he's an invited guest, he's participating, and they very likely know everybody there, and he knows the predicament, and now he's going to address it. Verse 6. Now there were set there 6 water pots of stone. Water pots of stone. These were not earthenware. These were not made by the potter on a wheel. These were stone jars. Now, how do you make a jar out of a stone? I guess that's a lot of chipping, isn't it? I have no idea how they did that. But these were, and the reason they were stone was the Jews believed that the earthenware containers could not be adequately cleaned, and so the stone was better, and that's why they used the stone jars for the purification. And when you have a party, you're going to need lots of water to wash dishes over that 6 or 7 day party. So they had 6 water pots of stone.
Were they big?
They were 20 gallons or more.
Wow.
20 to 30 gallons apiece, it says, they held.
So that's in liters, that's 75 to 115 liters.
Well, it in the King James is firkins. In the New King James it says 20 to 30 gallons.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, they use liters these days over there, but so it would be almost 4 times that.
Wouldn't be something you'd carry around.
No, it wouldn't be anything you'd carry around. You're right about that. So anyway, it was a lot of water. A lot of water. They had the 6 water pots there, according to the purification of the Jews, containing 20 to 30 gallons apiece. So once they were filled up, it was 120 to 180 gallons. It was a lot of water. So Jesus said to them, fill the water pots with water, and they filled them up to the brim. They filled them to the brim because in those days you couldn't drink water because it wasn't purified. It was not healthy to drink water because of the impurities. So they put a purifier in the water, which was wine, and they usually mixed it 1 part wine with 3 parts water or up to 10 parts water to purify to purify the water. So they filled it up to the brim so that it couldn't be said later that he just added a little wine to the water, because the water was up to the brim. And then he said to them, draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast. Okay, there's a miracle that has happened somewhere along the way here. When did it happen? And they took it, and when the master of the feast tasted the water that was made wine, when did that happen?
Sometime between dipping it and master of the life.
So you got full with waiting wine.
So, somewhere between the water being filled to the brim and the dipping it and the master of ceremonies tasting it. Somewhere along there. Now, just imagine somebody had the bright idea. We're going to bottle this and sell it because it'll be the only wine that there ever was made by Jesus.
You ever think maybe,
It never said he touched it.
No,
There's
no,
never touched
no, it doesn't.
you know, you're thinking that's a lot of water, a lot of wine. Maybe it was only wine once he dipped it out. The rest of it in there is still water.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. But I would imagine, because as I've been thinking about this, I would imagine that it was all turned to wine. Because wouldn't that be just like Jesus? To be extravagant with his generosity. So that from that point on, there would never be, for that party, there would never be a lack of wine. And it may be that this was a blessing to the couple as a wedding gift. You can sell the rest of it. It's the best wine that ever was. Ever was. Oh, I mean, I'm not a wine connoisseur, but there are people that are, and they pay extravagant prices for certain wines. But imagine, this was the best wine that there ever
What about the
was.
slaves and the servants there? Did they get saved right there? They saw a miracle.
They did see a miracle. By the way, not everybody that saw a miracle got saved. A lot of folks didn't. A lot of folks were hardened to that.
One of those slaves did.
A lot of folks still are. Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. But anyway, so we've got this 6 water jars made out of stone. That just the fact they were made out of stone is amazing to me. And so the master of the feast tasted the water that had been made wine and did not know where it came from, but the servants who had drawn the water knew. So we got the party, we got the predicament or the problem, then we have the provision. God himself, Jesus, cured the problem and spared the host, the groom, the embarrassment that would have come because Jesus was there. How many times are we spared from disaster because Jesus is there? He is with us.
More than we know. I
Yeah, more than we know.
For sure.
I think some of us wear our guardian angels out. I think we have from time to time. But the servants knew. The servants knew. The master of ceremonies is tasting this wine and he's, wow. And he calls the groom. The groom may not even know what has happened here. But he says, you know, most people serve the ripple first. serve the good wine first and then bring out the ripple later. After folks have had their palates sated and had a bit too much to drink, then you bring out the ripple. But you've done the reverse. You've kept the best wine until now. You've kept the best wine until now. You know, it's late. It's later than it ever has been. And maybe Jesus is doing that in our time, saving the best for last. We want to finish well. That was mentioned last week in the message. We want to finish well. And a part of finishing well is serving Christ where opportunity presents itself. God has brought together an incredible talent pool here in this place at this time. And the more I learn, the more excited I get, because there's always purpose in what God does. There's always purpose in what God does. This is not an accident. It's not just circumstance. God has brought us together. Now, what was the purpose of this miracle? Well, one of the outcomes, which we might say is purpose, is down in verse 11, where it says, "And his disciples believed in him." If in these last days God has brought this pool of talent together in this place for the purpose of doing something significant to win souls, to relieve hurting, we've got to pay attention, because there's always purpose in what God does. And today we're going to be in one of three camps. We're going to be in this camp where these disciples, these five, they believed. We're going to be in that camp. And because they believed, they spent their lives serving others and spreading the gospel. Then there are those who didn't believe. And that's illustrated throughout the Bible. As people saw the miracles, the religious leaders saw his miracles, and the only thing that came out of that was they wanted to destroy him. They did not believe. And then there was the third group of those that believed but were afraid of other people, that they might be put out of the synagogue if they expressed their belief in Jesus as the Messiah. We're in one of those three camps. We're in one of those three camps. And I hope today that we're all in the first camp, and that we accept the responsibility that comes along with that to finish well, to do what we can while we can. So you'll hear a little bit more about that as I get on my soapbox a little later today. So, yes?
You know, God's not a respecter of person. And look at that verse 5. His mother said unto him, "Servant, whatsoever he said, do it." You know, when a couple gets married, they need to know the Lord Jesus Christ. And there's nothing more important than a mother. His mother knows what his intent was. Mm-hmm. And that mother that's born of the Lord is so important to their kids. Getting a printed word and a living word.
Yep.
And it's true love. God knows the intent of our mind and our heart.
God does know our intent, yes.
mother should know the intent of the Lord, you know, and the blessing that was given there was come from the Lord, and just look how that followed through on that line
Yeah.
you were talking about.
Whatever he says to do it.
Amen.
Good advice, right?
Amen.
Whatever he says to do it.
And that mother is responsible to get what it is to do,
Yes.
to work.
All right.
I'm working on it, still good.
Working on it.
I'm working on
Yeah.
What, Luke?
it. It's still good,
Still good advice. Absolutely.
I'm working.
Still good advice. All right? And you're gonna hear about an opportunity a little later today, okay? Where you might plug in and serve if you're not already serving somewhere. Okay? All right, we're gonna close the lesson and then we'll talk about prayer requests.